On a street in Bengaluru and inside the metro, women were filmed without their consent. The videos were edited, posted online, and pushed to thousands of viewers. Now, this kind of videos do not go viral by accident. It's pushed by the systems designed to reward engagements. So what does it mean for consent, for safety, for those women in those videos who did not agree to be content? To help us understand the tech that drives this and what needs to change, we're joined by Prateek Waghre, a tech policy researcher.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Prateek, let's start with the basics. How do engagement-driven algorithms on platforms like Instagram or YouTube end up encouraging the spread of voyeuristic videos, especially those that objectify women? Now, these clicks get thousands of views in hours. What's driving that visibility?
Okay, so I think that's unfortunately not a very complex question in the sense that we've all experienced it, we've all seen it, and it's not just this type of voyeuristic content, but it generally applies broadly to anything that is likely to incite some sort of emotion, right? That's the way these systems are designed, right? So and I think it's important and that there are two parts of it, right? There's a social aspect of it, there's a technological aspect of it, and I think we have to consider both when we're discussing this, right? So yes, from a technological perspective, these systems are designed to optimize for quote unquote engagement, right? And often engagement is measured in forms of either views or likes or some form of interaction, and we've seen across platforms they tend to even weight different types of interactions differently, whether you're liking it or using emoji reaction, etc. Right? So there are different ways in which they sort of try and they interpret what kind of reaction it's getting from people, and then that is potentially used in ranking it, right? And then this is where the feed comes in, which is at what these platforms are doing is if you're looking at your explore tab or your news feed, depending on which platform it is, there's especially the algorithmic versions of it. What they're trying to do is optimize what they believe a person is more likely to engage with, right? And it's a combination of factors that go here. Potentially what that person themselves interacted with in the past, what similar users have interacted with, what is currently popular, what is popular in that particular geographical location, what's popular on the platform. So there's a whole range of parameters that they take in. It's quite complex in terms of how the technology works, but we often see it manifesting in the form of and again, this experience will vary from person to person, but we often see this, manifesting in the form that you have content that is sometimes that incites certain emotions that may be hateful. In some cases, you even get information that's useful, right? Depending on that. So it varies, but very often we also see it amplifying, what we call or what we ideally wouldn't want to see on our feeds, right? And then that's where the social aspect of it comes as well, right? Because it's in a way scoring from what other people are interacting with, and that's where this gets very complicated, right? In the sense of where do you draw the line between the technological component of it and the social component of it, right? Because you also then just to digress for a second, right? But you also then see this type of content being popular on platforms like Telegram, right? Where there isn't an algorithm. Right, where people are seeking it out, right, and then channels that share such type of content have, it varies, but in some cases thousands and hundreds of thousands of users, and things like that, right? So there are both aspects of it that we have to look at quite seriously.
One of the next question that actually came to my mind was, often we hear that algorithms just reflect on what users want, but when it comes to voyeuristic videos, like what exactly are they're building these systems for? Like, do you think these platforms are using this as an excuse to avoid responsibility?
These problems are complicated. I think let's not take away from the fact that it's not going to be easy for them to accurately identify certain types of videos, right? And I think voyeuristic ones become even more tricky in terms of just the interpretation of, okay, is this voyeurism or is this not? In some cases, it's quite obvious, right? Like the example that we're discussing, it's fairly obvious. In some cases, it may not be as obvious, right? So it's not always that easy to determine. You also have to take into account that they're not looking just for one type of content, right? The way they try to classify it is across all types of content, to be able to then differentiate, to identify different types of violations and this and that, right? So if the first thing, let's understand that it's not simple. That said, platforms do tend to then use that as an excuse to say, hey, this is too complicated and we can't do it. And we've also then unfortunately seen over the last couple of years, they've actually taken further steps. They've taken steps to actually reduce to some extent the enforcement of their community standards. We've seen Meta make changes and things like that, right? So they do sort of so it is complicated, but platforms also are probably not doing enough, right? To do that, because in terms of, look, what happens, there are other ways, right? Now proactive detection is a whole can of worms, right? And we can probably get into that. But then the question is, what happens when it gets reported to them, right? How do they respond, right? And we've seen in many cases that they don't respond, right? Unless it gets a lot of public attention, very often platforms don't respond, right? You get into a loop in a process where you might get an automated review, or you might get a human review. Again, that's not always legible from the outside. You don't know what's really going on there, and you just get a thing that's saying that, hey, look, we looked into your report and we didn't find it, and we've stuck with our original decision or something like that, right? So there isn't a lot of clear transparency in terms of how they work as well. When you actually identify it and show them an example where you believe their community standards are being violated, right? And so that's where, so even if you take away the complication of detection and proactive detection, right, this is where platforms are clearly not doing enough, right? In terms of, because you have this, you have this amount of this information on these platforms at scale, right? And so then the question is, are they investing enough into resources to be able to respond to these kind of requests and notices and things like that, right? Setting aside that decision making is complicated and we've seen them get a lot of this wrong, right? So it's not like I trust them to get all these decisions right. Right? It just by their own demonstrated lack of capacity on that front. That said, it does seem like they're not doing enough to even take into account when these reports are made to them and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we also have had similar, people come to us and tell how by the time the videos were actually taken down, which was reporting it more than 2 times, the damage had already been done. So in that way also, they're not proactively, why couldn't it happen in the first report, right? But which also brings back to the question of should platforms be legally required to be more transparent about how their recommendation system work? If not the moderation system, but is there are the platforms transparent about how their recommendation systems work, or
No, so today they aren't, right? You never really know how and on what basis some type of information is showing up on your on your feed or not, right? I think there have been various studies to try and do this, but it's not very clear. Now, look, I think the EU is doing something on this front as part of the DSA, if I'm not wrong, the Digital Services Act, in terms of giving researcher access to information to be able to study some of this a little better, but that's still some way away from from a situation where platforms are transparent about why you are seeing certain types of information on your feed. Again, this gets a little complicated by the fact that, look, sometimes the systems that they're using are not very clearly deterministic. So it's not always clear why, even internally, it may not always be clear why this is being recommended, other than solving for the engagement question, right? In terms of there is a belief that this will amplify engagement. It is the most likely to get to get some form of engagement from a user, in terms of, hey, is this video showing up on my feed because I saw three videos that were similar to this, and 5 people around me saw 4 videos similar to this. We're unlikely to be able to get it at that granularity, right? Which then there's a question of, okay, how, even if they're transparent, is it going to be meaningful in terms of actually us being able to determine clearly why we're seeing this type of content. But the researcher access part is interesting in the sense that then maybe there is scope for some investigations, based on what people are seeing, and based on studies, to then say, okay, why does this type of content do well versus this type, X do well versus Y not. Again, the complication there again is that research tends to be slow, right? So you will likely take months and years for consensus to build up that way, by which time they may have already changed their underlying systems and things like that, right? So you're always going to be playing catch up even on that front, right? So there's unfortunately nothing about this that's simple.
That's actually very sad. But I also want to know, like, are there any other countries which are doing a better job with policy or content moderation or algorithm transparency? Anything that India can probably learn to adopt?
Look, this is complicated because right now no one really has a handle on this. Right now, you have I think different the landscape around laws mandating transparency is a little complicated in the sense that in different countries they're in different stages, but we've not really seen any of them fully being in effect for us to really determine how they are. Again, I'll go back to DSA, Digital Services Act, to some extent, in the sense that it's requiring transparency about decisions and things like that, right? So the platforms have to actually upload the decisions that they've taken, and again, because of the volumes, this becomes very hard to make sense of, right? So even in that sense, even where you have transparency, sometimes it's not always easy to make make sense of it. And then going into the broader question of, look, to what extent is transparency possible, right? So and I'll go back to the broader social question here as well, right? Which is that, look, we can create a law that says, platforms need to be transparent and they need to tell us why this type of information is there. But I think we can already see that there is a social problem, right? And we don't necessarily need to wait for platforms to be transparent to start acting on some of those fronts, which are more complex, which are deeper rooted issues, right? Why is voyeuristic content doing well? Why is hate speech doing well in terms of engagement, right? Not in any sense. Or why is hate speech content doing, garnering engagement and things like that, right? Those are social problems. To some extent, we know some of the answers. In some cases, it tends to be a little fuzzy. That it's complicated. So you don't necessarily need to wait for platforms and algorithm, and transparency mandates on them to start to try and work on some of these issues, right? This is not to absolve platforms of their responsibility, right? Just want to be clear on that front. It's not to absolve them of their responsibility, but I think, like I said, it's important for us to both look at the social and the technical aspects of it. And knowing how platforms are as actors, to some extent, pragmatically understanding that we're unfortunately not going to get the level of transparency, the level of cooperation. And even if we get that, the level of accuracy and operational efficiency from them to tackle all these complex issues, right? And I'll stress on the fact that they're complex, because even if there is intent on their side, which is a question mark in my mind, but even if there's intent on their side, it's not easy for them to fully solve these, because these extend beyond the realm of just platforms and that into social layers where obviously platforms can't intervene beyond a point.
When you mention intent, that's something that comes to my mind, is that I've been hearing a lot about privacy by design. So how realistic do you think that is on probably like a short form video platform, which basically works on virality and engagement, right? So do you think, like, in that aspect, something can be done?
Look, I'll be honest, privacy by design to me is a buzzword that I don't know what it means, right? In terms of the way it's deployed, right? Like people say that, hey, we have privacy by design, but I don't necessarily know what that means. They very rarely go into a detailed explanation of why, how, what they've done in that sense, right? Very often it's limited to just a layer of saying consent or something like that, right? And again, in consent is also complicated, because if you take the example of a short form video platform or any video platform, when you're out there taking a video of, and you tend to capture people, none of their consent has been taken, right? So what happens in that case, right? Do we not allow such videos? Do we ensure that platforms have tools to blur out faces, which I think none of them do, and it's probably not that complicated for them to do. Or you probably have to check. I don't really upload videos on short form platforms, so I don't know if they have tools or not. But just by the fact that I'll see so many videos, their faces aren't necessarily blurred that often, right? Right. So you don't really have privacy as a consideration, and this is unfortunately not new, right? This we've seen right from the text-based platforms in terms of in that case it was just user privacy. Now it goes beyond just the user. It's also about when I am uploading a video, there are 5 people's faces in it, right? You're also then essentially saying that, hey, these 5 people were in this location at this time, right? None of them have consented to that information going on the internet in many cases, right? So again, that's a complex question. I don't necessarily know, and if anyone has an answer to that, right? Then you look at it in the question of, okay, what does that video do, or what does that video say? Like, I would love for a way to be excluded from being in the background of people's videos, right? There isn't anything that helps you do that. You'd probably, if funnily enough, you'd probably have to sign up for a service that goes and then scrapes videos on these platforms and then removes you, right? So and this is theoretical, I don't know if a service like this exists, but in the act of doing that, you have in a way done a trade-off with your privacy again, right? Because you've told this particular service that, hey, this is me, right? This is my likeness in video, this is my likeness in voice, or whatever, right? Now go out and scan the internet to remove me from these, right? So even if this were theoretically possible, just the act of trying to protect your privacy is also requires a trade-off with privacy, right? A simple example is if you look at some of these call screening services, right? To make sure your number is excluded, you have to register on them, right? Which sort of defeats the purpose, right? Like I don't want this service to have visibility into me, who I am in any way. But to ensure that my number doesn't get listed to anyone else using the service, I have to then work with the service and say, hey, this is me, please delist my number, right? So this question of privacy by design, it's a nice buzzword in my view, right? It's a nice buzzword, but I've rarely seen a clear articulation of what it means, how they're thinking about it, how they're actually protecting someone's privacy in a true sense, right? Again, not to take away that, look, these are complicated questions. I keep coming back to that because a lot of these things are complex, right? We'd like to believe that they're simple so that you have easy solutions to them. We don't. But even recognizing that complexity, very often these platforms are not doing enough.
I mean, it's very unfortunate, and also like the whole trade-off about like you have to give something for you to like achieve that your videos are not out there. And also brings us to the bigger question here. I was talking about like, videos where women were secretly recorded with the intent and, the bodies were zoomed into. But there's also the bigger question, like, there are so many of us walking on the street and so many of us with our phones, and our videos, our face is being captured, our location where we are, which, again, altogether, like you mentioned, it's a complex and complicated problem. And let's see to it. Like, are there do you recommend any kind of structural changes when it comes to like how algorithms recommend content or how monetization works? Because I understand like there's only little that is being done right now, but is there anything that is achievable remotely at least?
Look, so I think this has to happen at multiple levels, right? I don't know if it's solvable just at a platform level. Like if you look at the broader video problem, there's a question of social norms in a sense, right? That look, when you are recording a video, you try and make sure as few people as possible also come into it. When you're uploading the video, you try to blur them out, right? People don't do that. That's relatively easier to do. In the sense that you don't have to depend on you in the sense that who's uploading the video has the agency to do that, right? You don't necessarily have to wait for platforms to do that. Setting aside the fact that you have to actually make the effort of doing that, right? But in the sense that you can still choose to do that yourself. So there's a norms question there, right? That or do we ask before recording in a setting, right? Very often people don't, right? You're sitting there and suddenly you have a cell phone camera going across your face, right? And things like that. So at one level there's a social norms question, which I hope will evolve, right? Again, sometimes norms take a while to catch up, which I hope will evolve. I'm being optimistic. I don't know anything to back that optimism, but I'm being optimistic on that front, right? Then there's the question of just platforms and monetization, and I think this is where it again gets a little difficult, in the sense that, look, platforms today are creating certain incentives with the way they offer monetization, right? Which is, in one sense, to disregard these norms. Again, you're doing it for engagement, right? Now, in some cases, it's direct creator payouts, right? It's direct payouts. Sometimes you just want to get an audience so that you can get brands, etc., right? And sometimes it's, and not everyone's a monetizing creator. Sometimes you just want clout, right? So there are various. So those incentives remain, and I think until those incentives remain, the behavior is not going to change of people on platform, right? We're going to continue doing things that will garner engagement, right? And again, what that particular thing is will shift from time to time, right? And you see this episodically on social media platforms, right? Whatever is the conversation of the day, people are talking about that, posting about that, and then it shifts, and then it shifts, right? So which is that joke, right, about Twitter, that people today are experts on one subject and they're experts on another subject the next day, and a third subject the next day, right? But it all comes from one a thing of potentially wanting to be popular. Some parts of it are self-expression. We shouldn't take that away, because in a way that there's also that. But certainly platforms can do more in terms of due diligence, in terms of, especially when they are monetizing directly, right? In the sense of where they are doing payouts, right? Or they have creator programs, right? Or where they have ads. Right. I think where there is direct monetization on platforms, they should certainly be doing more to vet the type of content. And I say vet with some caution here, because again, you don't want to give platforms, because on the one hand we're saying, hey, we don't want to give platforms too much power, right? And so you don't want them to have too much discretion also. But somewhere there needs to be a responsibility in the form of, especially when they are paying or they are accepting payment. When it comes to ads, right? In terms of what type of content or information they are putting out, I don't think it's enough for them to just put their hands up at that point and say, hey, we're just looking at engagement, or we're just serving ads as they're coming, because there should be more effort or more action from them on that front. It's not going to significantly change, or it's not going to solve these problems completely, but I do think it's from a question of responsibility, right? Where they are spending money or where they are receiving money, there's certainly a higher degree of responsibility on them to ensure that the information that's going out at the minimum meets their own community standards, right? Which we often see that doesn't happen, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you have broken it down for us, in such a complex topic, but I can understand now, it is important, there needs to be change on all levels of it, and starting from our society and social norm of just taking our phone and shooting things. Thank you so much for joining us today and breaking this down. I mean, these in conversations about algorithm and accountability, or even just the fact that anything that goes out on internet is so complex, and I think it's very difficult day by day to understand what's happening. Like you mentioned, we are all playing catch up at the end of the day. If a woman walking down the street is turned into content without her consent and the platforms reward it, it's time we ask, who are these digital spaces really safe for? Now, if you have seen this kind of content, tried reporting it and got nowhere, do write to us. We want to hear from you. Now, at TNM, we do not wait for outrage to do our job. We report on what matters. And for that, we need your support. Scan the QR code to become a TNM subscriber.